Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 298, You Can't Please Everyone All the Time, with Russell Scott. There is nothing better than seeing development, no matter the activity. Watching someone start at the bottom level and through time and dedication, step onto a stage or under the lights or onto a field and realize that what they are truly capable of. You see the look on their face and you're going to be addicted. No matter what your choir's starting point, it is growth that keeps the members coming back. Welcome to a special joint presentation episode where cross-continental perspective meets a cross-posted podcast episode. Today, I get to welcome another new choir podcaster with London-based conductor Russell Scott, host of the new show, The Choir Director Podcast. In this episode, we pull back the curtain and compare notes from across the pond on what it really takes to lead an ensemble today. How do we thread the needle when it comes to inclusivity? Often, the flat platitude-rich online conversation of ensemble inclusivity misses the reality that many of us working with actual humans face every day. Namely, not everybody wants the same thing out of their choir experience. We tackle the massive balancing act, or carrot dangling act, that every director faces. What happens when we want to aggressively raise our musical standards without accidentally driving our singers out the back door? And the flip side, do we lose people when the environment is not rigorous enough? Plus, we dive into the psychology of choral communities, the modern pitfalls of academic self-censorship, and why the lasting bonds of a choir are ultimately forged in the shared vulnerability of music making, breathing together, singing together, and facing hard things. It's not just a social hour and icebreakers. The bond is created by the music. So whether you lead a school program or a community-based ensemble touring international stages, this unscripted, refreshing conversation is going to be something you're going to want to stick around for. So hang out, listen to the perspectives being bounced around, and of course reach out on the Choralosopher's Facebook page. You can head over to the Substack for Choralosophy, or you can just email choralosophy@gmail.com and let me know what you think about this conversation. And if you have any thoughts for Russell, I will make sure he gets them as well. Your music program or event deserves a platform that does it all, without the extra costs. With Ludus, you get seamless ticketing, built-in marketing, powerful fundraising, and volunteer management, where volunteers can sign up, schedule shifts, and track hours with ease. Need to sell merchandise and concessions in person? Ludus Retail lets you log sales by each group, track inventory, keep everything organized. Hosting music lessons or theater camps? They have a classes feature, which makes registration and student tracking effortless. And it's free for your organization. Thousands of programs already trust Ludus because they help you focus on what matters most, the performance. A big shout out goes to the producers and Inner Circle over at the Patreon page. These are folks that are really dedicated to keeping the lights on here at this show. Venture Studios, Chandler Smith, Brian Long, Michael Herron, Kyle Peterson, Steve and Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Angie Schilling, Rebecca Chalk, RJ McCracken, Michael Shimp, and Kyle Siddons. All right, everybody, I am here with Russell Scott. Russell is a choir director from the UK, currently talking to me from London, and we're going to be doing a joint podcast presentation on his new show called The Choir Director Podcast. Welcome, Russell.
Thank you, and welcome, Chris. It's absolutely a pleasure. I'm going to be hosting this too. We're going to do this in reverse too, so this is going to sound great because we can talk about all things from both sides of the pond. And welcome each other to our amazing listenership.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, I'm curious to know, as the the grandfather of the choir podcast industry, what brought you to this? Like, why did you start a show? Why are you doing this? What's your why?
I guess the reason was that I went looking for a podcast to listen to. I went looking for something that was very specific, and of course I came across you, and that was the first thing I found, and the most interesting, and the most I suppose it was just the most prolific as well. But I wanted to create something that was very specific for choir directors, about choir directors, and about their choirs. And I think with a network of people that I've worked with and that I've come across over the last 25 years I've been working in this industry as a choir director, I just felt that there was something else we could add. There was just something that I really wanted to find, a little niche, a little gap. And create something that was really usable and really practical, with lots of tips and lots of new resources for choir directors that perhaps wouldn't normally think to listen to a podcast.
Right. Yeah, and if it's interesting because I find that there are certain types of people who just, if it's on a podcast, they don't care. Like just by the very nature of what a podcast is and perceptions about podcasts, there are certain types of people who will never listen. And so one of the things that I have tried to do with my show since the very beginning is just not care. I'm just gonna make conversations that I think are interesting because I think they're interesting. And if people listen, great. And if they don't, great. And in a lot of ways, that has been a winning recipe, because if it's, and this is where I think it actually directly correlates to being a choir director and how we do our jobs. I choose repertoire that way in a lot of ways too, especially for my adult groups. If I'm not interested, like if I can't put this piece of music in front of a choir with authentic engagement and energy from myself, like this piece, oh my goodness, you guys, you are going to love this piece of music. There's this one spot on page 42, of this, 15-minute long song that when we finally get to that spot, it's just going to blow like if I can't present it with that kind of energy, they're not going to like it either, And so I think in a lot of ways, podcasting is similar. If I was having conversations with people that I find boring about topics that I find boring, then the audience will as well. And so when I'm interested with your show, what do you feel like when you're curating an episode, what is it that you're hoping to find specifically?
Well, it's interesting. You used the word authentic, and I think authenticity is everything, because I think you have to be able to be yourself. You have to be yourself as a choir director, but you also have to be yourself as a singer. And it's very easy, I think, for people to stand on stage, which is what I think, if you think about it, choir directors stand on stage at every single rehearsal in front of their choir. And it's very easy to over-prepare and overthink things and try and present something that you think the choir want. So that you kind of think, well, this is my rehearsal, I'm going to present this because this is what I think they want. But actually, it's about really getting involved in the detail and the emotion and getting people to be able to relax. And you have to relax too. You have to relax to be authentic. And I think it's very easy to, if you're working with a new group, for example, they have this this thought process of, oh, this is somebody important. They're standing on the stage in front of me. Standing on the stage, I use that word. But actually, you have to try and you have to connect with your singers. You have to connect with people. Yeah. And so in my show, I really try very hard to make my guests feel as relaxed as possible, as you have today when I've been talking with you on your show and you on my show. We're pretty relaxed. We're pretty cool about this, having a great conversation. And it's all about being authentic. It's about being able to relax enough to be honest about what we're talking about. We don't have to impress people by doing something in a certain way. If you're going to be yourself, you'll show your real talent and you'll show it really to the best of your ability.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I agree. I know in podcasting, one of my challenges over the years, I think I've probably had this is not an exact count, but probably about 275 different guests over the years. And I would say 25% of them, maybe one out of every four, I really have to make a point to direct the relaxation, if that makes sense. In other words, reminding people that we're just having a conversation. I'm just a person. You're just a person. We are not giving a presentation, a poster session at some national conference here. This is not, yes, people are going to listen, but also the reason they listen is because they want to hear the real you. They don't want to hear some curated version of you that is sanitized and safe for consumption in a professional setting. That we have conferences for that. We have academic classrooms for that. That already exists. People don't need that. You talked about earlier wanting to carve out a niche. That's essentially why I started this show 7 years ago. Is I felt like in the choir world we did not have a place for that. We didn't have a place for that authentic conversation where you don't already know what the person's going to say ahead of time. When I go to a conference session, I know what's going to be said. I've been around for a long time. I've been doing this for 25 years. I know that the certain types of things are going to show up in a poster session at a conference, and I'm not going to be surprised. I'm not going to be shocked. I'm not going to be like, oh wow, I've never heard of it that way before. That kind of thing. And so that a podcast, when you get people to let their guard down a little bit, you can actually get some of that authentic conversation, which I think is so crucial and missing.
It's interesting because in my first 2 or 3 weeks, and we've been doing this now for 4 or 5 months, and the response has been amazing. And I've met some incredible people, yourself included. I've met some incredible people and some very humble people, and I've met people that have messaged me privately after listening to the show and saying what they loved about it was the fact that it didn't feel scripted. We weren't trying to sell anything or promote anything. We were just being very honest and having conversations. And I think that's really important because I think listeners believe in the people they're listening to when they believe it's honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Now, I think that is so crucially important. And one of the things that has caused me some stress and some conflict over the years through the show is that I do it as a job. So of course I do promote products. I sell advertisement. That's how I do it. That's how I pay the bills. And so will cause some people to simply just not listen. One of the things that I do though is that I try to balance that so that, again, I said this before, some people will listen and some people won't. And I don't care. I'm trying to find the people that will. That's my goal. And I don't need 100%. So what I do, I have a pretty simple formula. For a 1-hour podcast, I'm not going to go over 3 minutes of ads. And so if I'm sold out, I'm sold out. If I don't have any space to sell, I'm not going to sell any more space. And so that part, just to keep a balance there, is important. And then I also try to balance it with the other stuff we've been talking about, is that when we do get to the conversations, you're not going to feel like you are hearing a script. And sometimes, though, I do have to tell the guests that. Like, I have to remind them. I've even had some people who will not come on my show simply because they know there's not going to be a script. It's not safe. In other words, if you don't tell me ahead of time what you're going to ask me all the way through, I'm not going to come on. And that has always been very puzzling for me because I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to ask you yet because I haven't heard you talk yet.
Yeah.
When you say stuff, I will hear it. And then I will, because I'm listening, I will ask you a question, and I haven't heard you talk yet, so I don't know what my questions are going to be. And that sometimes is an interesting thing because people are so comfortable with the curated conversation sometimes. And there are lots of choir podcasts, especially nowadays, they will do the curated conversation. And you'll have the topics, and you see the bullet points ahead of time, and you know what the guest is going to talk about. And to me, that's just another conference session. If you've been dreaming about taking your student group on a trip, your choir, but you want it to be more than just a bus ride and a performance, you should check out Kaleidoscope Adventures. They've been planning exceptional student travel for more than 30 years, and they specialize in creating experiences that are both musically meaningful and logistically smooth. From performance opportunities to workshops and clinics, the Kaleidoscope Adventures team handles the details from start to finish so you can focus on your singers. If you're ready to plan a trip that truly fits your choir, visit mykatrip.com or click the link in the show notes.
It's just dull, isn't it? It's just not interesting. It's not inspiring. I mean, every one of the guests I've had on this show have been an inspiration to our listeners because they're talking openly and honestly, and I don't give them any guidance of what we're going to talk about at all. I don't even give a topic to my guests. I just invite them on to talk about themselves, and I try very, very hard to invite people that I know will talk about a certain area, or they specialize in a certain area of their lives, of their music, and then I try and ask the questions. But we do it as a conversation. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's I refused to give what questions I was going to ask in the show for one of my first guests asked for the questions in advance, and I said, I'm really sorry, but I don't want to do that. I want this to be really open. And they were really, really nervous when they came on the show. But that's my job. My job as a presenter, as a host, is to make them feel comfortable, just like you would on radio, just like you would on TV. The presenter has the ability to put people at ease.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting because from my perspective of doing this for so long, I find that people are, in general, they want to speak freely, but we live in a world of nitpicking to the point of purity testing. And it has created a culture of self-censorship, especially in the United States, I would say, with our academic folks. So if you live in the academic world, there are just certain opinions you have to not only hold, but hold publicly, and you have to hold them by using the right words. It reminds me of my evangelical Christian upbringing in Kansas, in the United States in the 1980s. That when I was the church that I was raised in, not only did you, of course, have to be Christian, that goes without saying, but you had to use the right buzzwords in the right order, in the right situations, or someone would look at you as if you're not part of the team. And I see that in our environment. It's one of my founding whys for the Choralosophy podcast is I noticed that choir people were starting to behave like my culty Christian religion that I was raised in, and it makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to say the thing that I know you want me to say. I want to say what I'm actually thinking and feeling, and then it'll make you feel some kind of way. And so then you'll say what you are actually thinking and feeling back to me. It's like, to me, that's just how grown-ups behave in real life. And so my goal through podcasting is to try to create a little sliver of real life. The same conversation that I'm having with you right now, I would be having if you were sitting over here on my couch where I have my in-person guests. It wouldn't change. Or if we turned off the microphones and went down to my whiskey bar and drank some whiskey, it wouldn't change. It'd be the same conversation. It'd be the same conversation I was having with you if we were at a conference at the bar or in a conference session afterwards. I would say, what do you think about that? Well, I agreed with this part. I didn't really agree with that part. I don't think I would say it that way, but and to me, that's normal and that's okay. And we need more of that. And so I applaud you doing what you're doing. Welcome to the conversation. It's an important thing. And I'm glad that there's more people doing it.
Yeah. And it's wonderful being on your show and being heard by somebody that has been doing it for so long. I'm sure you've had your highs and your lows and everything in between, because and you have your moments of thinking, why am I doing what am I doing? And I think in this industry, and as I mentioned when we had the introduction at the beginning, I've been in the industry a very long time. So I've been in music since I was a kid, professionally, since the age of 8. So I'm now in my 50s. So I've been doing this professionally for 45 years in one way or another, whether it's on stage as a performer, whether it's a singer, whether it's a vocal coach. I now mentor choir directors. I run a very successful festival, the World Voices Festival, as we spoke about earlier. I run a very successful choir of 120 people here in the UK, and we tour and we record albums and we do concerts. And it's a very exciting life being part of the choral world. But I also think that with our vast experience in the industry, although not my vast experience in presenting a podcast, but in our vast experience in this wonderful choral world, I think it's really important that we use our ability, our experience, our knowledge to educate as much as we can, because there are people far less experienced than us, and there's always room to learn for those people that are very experienced. I feel like I'm learning every single day. I'm sure I'm going to learn something from you today as well, because we're learning all the time, and that's what's really exciting about this. But the show should never be about us. It's not about us. It's about a conversation. It's about the guest. So I suppose today it is about us, because we're each other's guest, but it's about the guest, and it's about the discussion, and it's about learning from each other. And I think that is why I do what I do, because I love what I do with a passion. I love learning. I love discovering. I love creating opportunities. That's my bag. I love creating those opportunities that can change people's lives.
Yeah.
I've done it many times. I continue to do it because that's what floats my boat. I just love seeing people saying, I've never had an experience like this. You take them onto a world stage somewhere, you take them abroad, you take them to another country, you take them to a festival, and they say, this changed my life. That's the biggest compliment of all. It's far greater than any money could pay.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's really good. And I agree. One of the things that I will shout from the rooftops is how much better of a choir director I am because I do this show. I get to do professional development every single week. I get to have a much more nuanced experience of professional development because I get to have a one-on-one conversation with the person who is an expert on that thing, whatever it is. If I have a vocal pedagogue, voice scientist person on the show, or a neuroscientist who studies how brains learn, or if I have a historian on the show who is, specializes in a certain genre of choral music, I don't get to just sit in the audience of the presentation and take notes. I get to ask questions back and forth of that person. Nobody gets to do that. Like I am so fortunate to be able to learn from that. And I think one of the things that makes it cool for the audience is that I don't necessarily ask all the questions that each individual audience member would ask, but they get to kind of live vicariously through my ability to ask those questions and my abilities even to, because sometimes in a conference we want to raise our hand and say, actually, I don't know if that's right. Can we talk more about that? And I get to do that. I get to do that and have an authentic conversation with people. But I learn from them. I get to take the ideas that I think would work really well in my choir, and I get to go try them. And if they work great, I get to keep doing it. And if they don't, I know I'll get more ideas next week. It's a pretty amazing thing.
Now, having spoken with so many choir directors as guests on the show, what do you think have been the real challenges that choir directors face over and over and over again? Time and time again, you hear the similar messages coming from people about their own challenges as a choir director.
So that's an interesting question, and I like that. I think I would give it two different answers, because one would be the perspective I've gained from having the conversations that I've actually recorded on the show, which is a very different answer than the one I would say from all the direct messages and emails over the years, because those are two different things. So usually when directors come on the show, even in my format of conversational back and forth type of a style of show, most people don't come on because they want to talk about all the things they're not good at. So usually they want to talk about the things that they have done well. And so the challenges don't always come out in those conversations. It's the here's the thing I did to meet that challenge, to conquer that challenge. And then in the private messages is where I get all the challenges. It would be in the questions about a lot of so on Choralosophy, there are a lot of guest interviews, but there's also a lot of teaching pedagogy type presentations that I do. And I go do those around the country, and I work with school districts and those types of things. And I present those conversations, and I get a lot of those challenges through those episodes. So things like, okay, it's great that, I understand the pedagogy that you're trying to present here. I'm working with these kids, but I only get to see them, twice a week. What do I do if I only get to see them twice a week? You get to see your kids every day. What do I do if I don't have a principal a headmaster or whatever you call them in your various countries, who doesn't support the fact that I'm even trying to do this? How do I conquer that problem? Because if I can't conquer that problem, then I'm not going to be able to do these pedagogical things that you're presenting. And so those are the types of questions and challenges that I hear the most, which are, in a podcast, you can kind of present the ideal world. You can present if things in a perfect world are happening, well, here's what it might look like. Here's how it might function. But then I have this challenge that you didn't mention. Let's talk about that. And so I get a lot of those as well. And I find one of the things I've tried to do over the years is get people to come on and talk more about that. But people don't want to, because it's something that, getting people to, I don't want to be seen online criticizing my principal. Well, okay, sure, don't. So those things are harder to have conversations about in public. And so it's an interesting dichotomy that I've discovered.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think I always try in my questions to not ask the obvious, because it's very easy to have a guest on the show and just ask the same boring questions. And what have you done before? And where are you going? And what are you looking forward to? All of these kind of things. What's your biggest challenge? All of those kind of questions. And I think that choir directors, depending on the type of group they're working with, their type of choir, the size of choir, the genre of choir, and even, what style of choir, where are they based in the world? How big is their choir? All types of different choirs and organizations have different ways of working. And I think it's very important to understand that every choir is unique, every choir. And I think I read so much on social media in some of these groups where choir directors are posting the same questions over and over and over and over again. Uh-huh. And I just think to myself, sometimes you just have to look within yourself and just be true to yourself. What do you want from your choir? How do you want to deal with a situation? What do you want the end result to be? When they ask a question, whether it be about recruitment or retention or membership, and every organisation is different. So you get lots of people answering questions that it doesn't really work because it's not directed at them. That's why when I'm mentoring, people get the one-to-one. I know exactly what they're trying to achieve and understand that and can advise them. So I think it's very easy to sort of get misdirected when you are answering questions. If I'm a community choir director and a head of music from a school asks a question, now I may be able to answer about music. I may be able to answer the question about, I don't know, how to deal with a difficult member, for example, or a behavioural issue. But I'm not going to be able to answer about working in a school, for example, or how your kids might respond to certain things, depending on their age.
Yes.
I think it's a really tricky one, isn't it?
No, I know exactly what you mean. In fact, that's probably a good kind of launch into a more granular version of this conversation, because let's take the one you mentioned of you go onto a Facebook page, which I always say is the worst place to get advice about how to solve a problem for a choir director. However,
Exactly.
I can't complain too much because it's where I get a lot of my topics. I go on and look for where the pain points are in the profession, and I scour the Facebook pages. What is everybody asking about? What is causing people stress? What are the things that professional development could be a beneficial thing in this area? And I go find the guest or do a presentation. So I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth here when I say that that's a terrible way to get the advice. But your point, I want to go back and make sure we highlight this, is that the answer to some of those questions is going to be vastly different depending on what kind of choir you direct. So the answer that I give as a school choir director in the United States, where I have a gigantic pool of kids who live in the area of the school and have to go to my school because they live in that area, and they're going to take choir because they get to sign up for it because it happens to happen between their math and their history class, and I can walk from here to there, and then I can walk from choir to history, and I don't really have to get out of the car or doing anything is very different than a community organization like you might direct, where somebody's got to choose to take some portion of their evening to drive across town and have a choir rehearsal. We live in different worlds. And so the answer to that question of how do I recruit or how do I retain or whatever are two different questions. Thoughts about that?
Exactly. They are completely different. You as a choir, as if you're working in a school, you've already got your membership. You've just got to recruit them. You've got to get their interest and inspire them and excite them with the music and what we're doing as a choir. Because I think up to about, certainly in the UK here, up to about 20 years ago, choirs were not cool. The choirs were for, dare I say, I don't like being ageist, but choirs were seen as churchy things for old people. Nobody sang in choirs. Now, in the UK, in the world, choirs are a really cool thing, because you have all these amazing a cappella choirs and these, even these professional groups, people like Voces 8 and Swingles who have been around forever. It's really cool to be in a choir because it's not just about church music. It's about contemporary music. It's about pop music. It's about gospel music. It's about folk music, world music, classical music. It's about everything. And I think choirs now understand that anything is possible, and they are inspired by their choir director to do it. But as you say, our audiences are actually different. Now, I've run choirs in schools. I've run choirs in theatre schools and music and drama schools, and I've worked with choirs all over the place, from kids, young kids, right up to very old kids in their 70s and 80s, are still kids. But my choirs, my choir, Next Stage Choir, and we have 3 locations here in the UK. We have about 120 members. Many of them have been in the choir since the choir started 16 years ago. And we always have a turnover of people. That's the nature of the beast. But they are paying money to be part of something. They're paying money, subscribing for membership of a choir. And it's my job to give them the most outstanding experience I can possibly give them. And I am judged on that every single minute of every single rehearsal, because they're a paying audience. They are a paying membership. And I have an enormous amount of respect for my membership. Every person is a person. Everyone is responsible. It's not about numbers. It's not about, it's not like some choirs out there are more of a community choir. We don't call ourselves a community choir. We are a choir, because community choirs here in the UK are incredibly popular, and they are very much geared around you turn up and you make music and you sing. And there are some very high standard community choirs out there, and there are some that are just social things that you turn up and you have a piece of cake and you have a drink and you have a good laugh and a sing through some music, which is great. So my choir is a little bit more serious than that, which is why the choir decided as a unity to not call themselves a community choir. They just wanted to call themselves a choir, because they want to learn. It's about learning as well as singing. It's about performing. It's about learning. It's about learning to read music. 80% of the choir, my choir, have learned to read music from being in the choir.
Wow.
And I teach. We always use proper scores, proper music. We read the music. I teach. We have online sessions where I'm also teaching them different skills of vocal technique and vocal health and reading music and sight reading music and reading the scores and understanding the geography of the pieces. So I'm trying to give them the very, very best musical experience I can. And that is, that is what makes us and makes the choir amazing. But it's the people that make it amazing. It's not just me. I'm providing the offering. I'm providing the opportunities to learn. I'm providing the opportunities of performing, collaborating with other choirs. I try and give them everything I can, and I give 100% in whatever I do. And I'm very proud of that, and I'm very proud of each and every person because, as I said, I make them take responsibility, and I make them understand that every single person in the choir makes up the choir. No one can just sit in the back and just, do a crossword or something or read a book. They've got to actively engage, and I give them the best experience for doing that. But that's my group. And the group next door that are in a community centre, perhaps, or they're a school, or they're a drama group, will have a completely different experience. And I think it's very important to understand your audience, understand your membership, in order to be able to recruit new members, to be able to retain members, and to give them the experience, your vision of what you want for them. Would you agree
Absolutely.
that is the case in all walks of life? Would you completely agree with that, or do you think that perhaps that's not applicable to everybody?
Well, that's so interesting. I would say it is applicable to everyone, but in different ways, which is not necessarily the answer. But that's kind of how my brain would process all of that. I think all of that, I would agree with all of that. What I was thinking about as you were telling that story about what your choir is like, it kind of spurred some instant comparisons in my world, where I'm trying to think about how what you just described is a little bit different than what I do every day. So for example, first I have a question. In your choir, you mentioned how they're something a little bit more serious, is what you said, than a typical community choir, and so they decided to drop the word community and just be a choir, and then you learn vocal technique, you learn how to read music, etc. Is it made very clear to the new members that you are signing up for a thing where you're not just going to show up and sing as you sing? We're actually going to learn how to do certain things. Is that made very explicit, or do they just show up and just absorb that through the culture?
It's very specific, because I make sure that when they want to join the choir, if they're interested in joining the choir, they come for a taster session. And they sit in on a rehearsal, and I give them the music, and I run a rehearsal, and they get part of it. And then at the end, they come up to me, and I tell them everything. I mean, I tell them what is expected, I tell them what the experience will be like, and what my vision is for the choir and what we're doing, along with all the rules and all that sort of stuff on how to join and all that. But it's made very clear that we are a little more serious than most, but we do it in a very, very accessible and fun way, because we don't call it an audition. We call it a voice review. So I do hear all my new members on a one-to-one, because I want to hear their voices. I give them 3 tests, actually. I put them through 3 tests. I check they can pitch. That's the number one. And that's obviously, it's number one, they can pitch. Secondly, I check that they can hear well and that their hearing is good, because my absolute belief is that the listening is much more important than the singing. And then thirdly, I check that they can pitch against others, because in choirs we have to sing in harmony. And often you could be singing next to somebody that's in a different voice part, and you've still got to be able to hold your own. So I test with 3 different elements. But I don't ask them to prepare anything. I just and it's very, relaxed in the way I do it. But we do check that. But we do make it very clear that this is fun. People are doing this for a hobby. This is not their job. This is my job, but it's not theirs. They're coming to enjoy their evening, as you say. They come for a couple of hours. Some would like to think it's light relief, but they come away feeling like they've accomplished something, and that they're constantly achieving and constantly developed. And there are many people that have come for tasters that are long-standing members of the choir, and now some of the best singers in the choir that never sang before they came for their taster. And that's that's exciting to find those people.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because it does then, that confirms my suspicion that we have some very different premises from which we start our choir journeys every day. Even the the fact that you choose if they can pitch or they can match pitch, I'm assuming that's what you mean by that, and then hold some kind of a part against another part. I don't test for that because I teach them how. Because I get to see them every day, Monday through Friday, for about 45 minutes, and I also get to separate them from age 14 as their voices are changing and developing into a beginner course where this is where you go because you've never done this before, and I get to start at square one. This is what a quarter note is. This is what a major third sounds like, and we get to practice it until they can do it, whether they are a natural pitch matcher or not. And I get to even develop controversial opinions, like there is no such thing as a person who can't match pitch. There is a person who hasn't had time to develop the musculature with their brain at the speed that they need in order to match pitch. There are a lot of those people, but there's no such thing as people who cannot do it. And so that's a different framework. And I think in a lot of ways, choir directors who listen to shows like both of ours are probably going to come away with all kinds of things where a guest or the host or whoever says a thing about the right way to do this, or this, and they grumble. Well, that's not right. Well, but the reason that we would have those disagreements is because our frameworks, our starting places are all so different. I get to then take my beginners and teach them for an entire academic year and then move them into a next level course where we get to do the next level of difficulty. And then I get to move them from there into an even third level of difficulty where over time, I get to cultivate all these skills with young people until they can pick up a piece of music by the time they're in 12th grade and just look at it and hear it happening in their head, and just sing it fluently and, do all the things that professional singers can do. It's amazing and it's so much fun, but in a community environment where I see them for 2 hours a week, I wouldn't be able to do that, especially as adults. I would have to start where they are and make it enriching and get right to the music making, because they would never tolerate how much time I take with people to get to that point, or else they would stop subscribing and stop driving back. Thoughts?
And it's really exciting to see that progress, isn't it? And development in a school with young people. There's nothing better than seeing development, in my opinion. I know when I teach, when I coach, and I get somebody that is at bottom level and they really want to learn and they do something, and then they, finally, maybe a year later, maybe 2 years, maybe longer, you've heard that they're on stage somewhere, in a show somewhere, or on a concert, or they're doing a solo somewhere. It's so rewarding to have that journey, to know that that's where they've started and where they are now. And in fact, some of the most exciting journeys in my own choir have been from people that turned up for a taster, couldn't really get through the voice review, really struggled. And it's very rare, but some people I've had to say, look, I think you should go and get some lessons and come back and have another go. Most people, I like to try and find a way of it working and like to give them the opportunity to prove, to show that in a period of 6 to 8 weeks, they can accomplish great things. And the most exciting ones have been those people that can barely pitch, can barely hold a tune, and then over a period of 6 weeks, normally is around 6 weeks, you see this massive development. And they then are one of the people that are saying, look what I've been able to do as a result of being in a choir. That's the power of singing in a mass group. It's that excitement of being able to get somewhere and do something, achieve something you never thought was possible. The classic situation is a wife brings a husband who didn't really want to come to choir, and he ends up loving it more than she does, and he wants to do solos, and he wants to do every project under the sun, and she's like, oh, I might sit out this one, it takes over. Because it's an amazing environment, isn't it? And I think it's an amazing environment whether you're at a school or whether you're doing this in the community. I'm actually, at the moment, I'm MDing a production of Sweeney Todd at an all-girls production at a girls' school. And in their amazing, stunning theatre that they have at the school. And it's very exciting seeing these girls, firstly sing a piece that's not written just for girls. That's really exciting to see, and how they deal with it vocally, and how I'm able to try and guide them accordingly to get the character out of the piece. But also to see some of the really young ones, the 11, 12-year-olds singing against the more experienced girls. And it's a really exciting thing, because you can see the journey. You can see as they're learning and developing over the weeks and months of preparation for the production, you can see how they're growing as people. And that's being part of a group. And it's not a choir, it's an ensemble of a theatre production. But it's the same principle. Working together, small groups, listening, learning, singing together, harmonics.
Right.
So,
Yeah, no, I'm interested too in this kind of discussion about, how different choir environments are comparable but also different. So I'm just going to ask a question about your environment again. And so let's say you were to decide to raise the musical bar for next season. In other words, you send out an email that says, okay, our standard has been this, but it's now going to be this because we're going to really shoot for the moon this next season with the musical quality. We're going to go, much more difficult music, higher expectations of preparation, etc. And would you say that there would probably be some people in your organization who would react negatively to that?
I think that people like challenge. They like to be challenged, They like to be pushed, and they like to believe that they can achieve greatness and they can achieve more than they thought was possible. And I love that because it means that challenges me to try and make that happen for them. And it's an interesting question because it happened just over a year ago for us.
Okay.
We were doing our sort of regular concerts, and they say, we meet 3 times a week, 3 different choirs doing all the same music, but we meet on different evenings every week for a couple of hours. So some people I see multiple times a week because they come to multiple rehearsals. Some people I see once a week. So that's where it differs, as you mentioned. But we had the opportunity to go and sing with an orchestra over in Vancouver last year, singing Disney suites. So there was an orchestra, a choir of combined with mine 100 singers on stage in a big concert hall, stunning concert hall, and the choir had never done anything like that. We've done the little pieces. We've done 3-minute pieces, 5-minute pieces, a cappella pieces, pop music, but lots of musicals, lots of Broadway stuff, show tunes and stuff, and never done something like a Disney suite. Now, a Disney suite, as I'm sure you're aware, it's very orchestral. It's very choral, traditional choral, even though it's not classical, but it's got classical entities to it. And the standard needed to be really high. I mean, really high to work with an orchestra. Choir had not a huge amount of experience working with live musicians and orchestras before, and we had one of the fastest learning periods ever. We had to learn 90 minutes of tricky choral music, sometimes in 8 parts, sometimes 12, sometimes 16 parts. I mean, it was huge scores. And we had to learn it in the space of 4 months. So we started last January and it had to be done by April when we were going on tour. So I prepared as much resource as possible for the group to learn the music and then put the entire group under the most enormous pressure I could have possibly imagined. Not intentionally, but because the bar was set high and I wanted as close to choral perfection as is possible. It had to be accurate, it had to be every single person delivering 100%, and it had to be, impressive, really impressive. We were going to sing to an audience of 2,000 people. It had to be really good. We hadn't worked with this organisation before at all. I made the whole choir learn the music, not just those people that were going on tour. And because later in the year, the group from Vancouver came over to London and we did the same concert here in London at the Royal Academy of Music with our whole choir. So a group of them. So we did an exchange doing the same music. We put a 40-piece orchestra together here and we did the same concert. It was magnificent. The ultimate, the conclusion to all of this was that it was the most incredible concert, both sides of the Atlantic. However, we lost members in the process. The pressure of raising the bar was too much for some. And they lost interest or they hated the pressure. They've come away from their jobs. They've come away from their home life to have an evening of making music and learning. And they've just had this most intense situation of singing this music that was incredibly difficult and didn't have time at home to do some practice and just found it too difficult. And so we had probably the lowest retention in the choir's history during that period. And our membership, new membership, was lower than ever. People came for taster sessions and some left in the break. They just couldn't manage it. And I was very unapologetic about it because I wanted to raise the bar. And I said, okay, if people don't want the same as we do, then this is not the right choir for them right now. Don't you find working with students, though, much more challenging in some ways in that respect? Because although you're seeing them more often, if you are working on a piece of music or a production, they surely can just say, we don't want to do it. And then that's it. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, so in my school, they can't just quit. They're committed for the year.
But what if they quit? What if they say, I don't want to do it?
Then the school would say, sorry, you're done at the end of the year.
Right.
There's a grade attached to it. And so that's one of the differences in the U.S. It's an academic grade. It affects their overall academic picture to fail a class.
Wow,
And so,
that's incredible.
yep. So that when they take my class, it's just like taking a math class. They're going to get a syllabus at the beginning of the year that explains here are the expectations, here are the things you do every day in order to earn a grade. And if you're not doing those things, here are the consequences to your grade. Not showing up to the concert is a reduction of certain portion of your grade. So it's treated in the very it very much, it is a class. It is a class like any other class. My academic content just happens to be music, learning to do music, and learning to sing and different aspects of that. So, but I actually want to stick with what we were just talking about for a second, because I had a master plan here, because now I want to ask you the flip side of that question. In your environment, and there's a reason, just stick with me. What if you went to your choir, and this might have to be a hypothetical, because that was a really good example of a non-hypothetical, where you say, hey guys, I've crunched the numbers, we really need to expand our membership, and in order to do that, we're going to have to become more inclusive with our singing placements that we do at the beginning. I might have to lower the standard for new membership in terms of what they can do musically, and we're going to probably have to start doing easier music. Do you think that you would also lose people there?
What an interesting thought that is. I think most of my choir would trust me. They would trust my judgment that that was the right thing for the choir to do. They like the idea of doing some easier music that they could learn quickly and that everybody could get on board with very quickly, and then they'd get bored. And
yes,
and that's
I agree.
The thing. They would at that point then think, this is not pushing me now. After 3 or 4 months, we're just doing the same easy music. Oh yeah, we've recruited some new members. Those members are not at the standard we were when they started. And now we're having to lower our standards to then bring more people on board to bring it back up again. And we're going to have to go through that horrible process of trying to get all those members with less ability up to our standard. And I think ultimately I could lose some of the best singers in the choir by doing that. It's a really interesting idea.
The ones who are fed, yes, the ones who are fed by the challenge.
Yeah.
And so the reason I wanted to frame both sides of that coin for you to see how you reacted, but also for the audience to think about, is that I guess this would put you in the category, or put us in the category of one of my many controversial hot takes over the years, which is that I think in the choir world we have become obsessed with an oversimplified and platitude version of what it means to be an inclusive choir. It is very popular in choir world to talk about how inclusive your choir is on Facebook. Absolutely. So that you get lots of likes and loves and shares. And then no one actually chooses to dig into the reality of what diverse groups of humans actually want. Because the reality is they don't all want the same thing. And so in a choir program, you could frame what I just did as, we're going to be more inclusive by allowing more people to be in it regardless of what their musical ability is. And we would let those people in the door, and then we would pat ourselves on the back and say we're being inclusive. But meanwhile, some other people would leave through the back door. And are we being inclusive to them? Nobody wants to think about that. Like, we don't. So you're not going to make the perfect choir. And I think that's why I call it a platitude. You're not going to make a perfectly inclusive environment, because some people will want more musical challenge and leave if they don't get it. And some people will need less musical challenge as a way to get in the door, or they'll leave if they don't get that. And then the reality then is, to me anyway, the obvious answer to this conundrum is that we need lots of different kinds of choirs. We don't need to try to create the perfect choir that no one can criticize. We need lots of different choirs that create different entry points along the spectrum. We need Voces 8, and we need the choir in the community that literally just shows up and yells and just has a drink afterwards. We need beer choir all the way to Voces 8. That's my opinion. Thoughts about that?
Well, I absolutely agree with that, and I tell my tasters when they come that there are all types of choirs in the area, and here in the UK we've got more choirs than we've ever had before. It's in every town you probably have 10 different choirs, some competing with each other for the same people, but some, different types of choirs, whether they be female or female or male voice choirs or gospel choirs or a cappella choirs. There's all different choirs, but there are choirs for everybody. But it does beg the question whether it should be quality over quantity, because I know that, and I mean, I've got this agreement with you about this inclusivity thing. Inclusivity doesn't necessarily have to mean inclusivity of all abilities. Inclusivity should mean...
I agree.
Inclusivity should mean that people from all different cultures and ethnic backgrounds and race and religions should be able to join a choir together, and we are all inclusive. It doesn't necessarily mean that we all have to be this level high or this level low or in the middle or non-readers or readers or students. It doesn't have to mean that. I absolutely believe we are an all-inclusive choir. We let anyone join. Every single person is welcome, no matter their background, no matter where they come from, what their beliefs are. Everyone is welcome. However, we are very particular in that we tell people what the choir is like. What's the experience of the choir like? What's the expectation? What's the standard like? But the danger there, of course, is that when you do get people that have never sung before or can't read music or have never sung in a choir before or have only ever sung in the shower, they think they're not good enough to come to a choir like ours. But actually, when they start doing it, they realise very quickly they can. And so we probably put some potential members, we probably put them off of joining by making it sound really serious and it's only for people that are really good. That's not the case, but it will come across that way. And if I list our resume of the things that we've done over the years, somebody that's never sung before is going to go, oh my goodness, I couldn't do that. That's way beyond my ability. But actually, what I love is the people that will try. And when they try and realise they can do it and give themselves a chance, they don't have to perform in week 1. They could perform in 12 months' time. There's no pressure to suddenly get on stage, but take your time to learn and get into the choir. And take time to get to know people, because I think the social side of all choirs, no matter shape, size or type, I think the social element of choir is probably more important than anything, because you have to gel, you have to welcome people, and the friendships that you make are what helps to retain membership and to retain the belief in the brand and the vision of the choir.
Right. Now there's a tension there too. So maybe this could be our last little nugget to chew on here, because I think in both of our environment, these things are going to be universally true, but to different degrees. Of course, there's a difference between working with adults and 14-year-olds. That's a very different thing right there. But one of the things you just said, I think highlights a tension for me, which is that the community or the social aspect is so much more important. And the other, which I agree with, but there's some nuance here I want to dig into. So the other day I saw a colleague, I won't mention a name, of course, because I'm not trying to criticize a person, just an idea that I saw online, which was a session at a conference here in the United States that was going to talk about, according to the poster, how the most important things that we do in choir are actually the non-musical things that create community. And this session was going to be about how all those other non-musical things go together to create the choir and why people would join it. And I immediately kind of just recoiled, because I don't think that that's true at almost any level of choir. Because if it were, then it would be a social club. If it didn't have the musical element, the element of singing together, then there wouldn't be a choir in the first place. And so I kind of recoiled at the words most important. The most important things are the non-musical things. I disagree. I think the most important things are the musical things, and then the community, actually, the community aspect, the social aspect, is formed as we create the music together. It's as I breathe next to you, and as I trust that when I sing, you will sing, and when we hear that sound release into the room that we just created, our sense of community builds from that, and it to work it the other way around would be inauthentic. Thoughts?
Well, actually, I think perhaps I've misstated what I meant by that. And when I say that socially is the most important thing, I think it is for the member. It's not for me. I don't need everybody to forge great friendships. I don't need that to happen. I don't need them to go out for drinks after choir. I don't need them to go around to each other's houses or, go to the movies together. I don't need any of that. I'm all about the music. All I care about is the music. All I care about is creating these opportunities and experiences for my members and for them to learn and get the best experience. For the members, though, when I talk to them, why do you stay in the choir? Because I've made such amazing friendships in the choir and we've shared such great experiences together. So and
see that I agree. That I agree with.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of my students at school too. Most of them, recruiting for me is convincing them that it's going to be a social environment. But here's where I think the crucial thing for all choir directors is, for me anyway. And you can say if you don't agree with this. But I think without the music being at some level that they perceive, the members perceive as quality, that social connection becomes very difficult. In other words, and I'm an athlete as well. I know that when we are winning, it is a whole lot easier for the boys on my team to gel socially because there isn't constant tension. There isn't constant disappointment that would get in the way of those social connections. And of course, that's why earlier I framed the dichotomy of what if we push them too hard, and also what if we don't push them enough, we're going to lose some people. And I always see our job as to be the master carrot dangler. We are dangling a carrot out in front of a horse. And if we push it too far away from the horse gives up. If it's too close to the horse, they're just going to gobble it, and they're not going to strive to reach the carrot anymore. And I think our job of all choir directors, school, community, church, anywhere, is to figure out just how far that carrot should be from the horse. Because for every group, it's different.
You think it's harder though with kids, particularly at schools, because they see each other every day of the week, and they're not always going to be best friends with each other. There's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be things they don't agree with, or friends that they've got through the years, and other people they just don't like and they don't want to be with and socialize with. And they're seeing each other every single day, as you say. Are there other challenges that come with that, where against a choir like mine, who see each other once a week, twice a week, or 3 times a week, only for a couple of hours?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. There are social challenges that come about in school choirs that have nothing to do with the choir. They are dramas that walk in the door from the hallway. My boyfriend just broke up with me, and he's across the room in the tenor section. And that kind of stuff. Of course, I'm sure that does exist in community groups too. People meet and start dating, and then they break up and all that. That's not unique necessarily, but absolutely. But I would say that it doesn't change the core premise, which is that a lot of, in my experience, I've taught now about 3,000 teenagers over the course of my career. And the friendships formed within choir classes in a school, again, because we are doing this musical work together, because we are, it's why obviously it's probably a spurious analogy, but for the same reason, soldiers oftentimes create lifelong bonds, because they are facing something very scary and very challenging, but they're doing it side by side, shoulder to shoulder, sometimes sleeping back to back to keep your heads out of the mud. Those bonds get formed as a lifelong bond. And I think in a choir, we are also facing very vulnerable, very challenging, very scary things, but we're facing it next to a person who does it with us. And I think that without facing those musical challenges, though, I would contend that those bonds just aren't going to happen no matter how many icebreakers and little post-concert meetings you have, or how many parties you throw during the course of the year. The actual lasting bonds that happen with choir singers happen in the breath. They happen on the breath. They happen in the sharing of the music. And without that attention to detail and quality that we all face together when we go to a choir, I think we would become just a social club where we know somebody for a year and then never talk.
Yeah, it's true. And there's that social thing again. It's that fine line, isn't it, between music and social. And it's all about understanding the personalities of the people as well. As a choir director, you have to know everybody. So I was saying earlier, it's not just, in my choirs, people are not just numbers. Everyone is an individual that plays and contributes a part of the overall choir, the community of the choir, the sound of the choir, musically, the intelligence of the choir. And what makes the brand, what makes our brand what it is, it's the people, and each and every person plays a part, and they're equally important. And I think I'm, as I'm sure you do, and as all teachers do, you have to get to know your students. You have to get to know every person. Whether they're paying money to be there or not, you have to understand people, because at the end of the day, they are people, and they have lives, and they come to choir because they want to be part of that great music making and that great organization.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I would only add that, one of the things I find myself fortunate over the course of my career to work with a broad spectrum of singers, and it sounds like you have as well, and so I think you'll identify with this, where I get to know what it's like to to give someone their very first ever experience with choir, but I also get to know what it's like to have an 85-year-old tenor in my church choir who's been singing longer than I've been alive, who's had all kinds of choir experiences from beginning to amateur or amateur to more, high-level choirs in their lifetime, and to see their to direct a person whose own voice has gone through seasons of change and decline and growth, and etc., all the way to professional musicians who, when I step in front of them, they expect of me a very, very high level of musicianship, where I am intimidated to be in front of them because of how good they are. And I've gotten to do all of those things. And sometimes I've gotten to do all of those things in 1 week.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that wonderful, though? Well, that's what we love about what we do. It's that.
Right. Yes, and I think for me, that's why I think I have this perspective of that we're not going to thread the needle perfectly with how demanding our choir environment is musically for every singer who's in the room all the time. We should be trying to figure out where that carrot goes, like I said before, but we shouldn't also beat ourselves up when we don't. So, for example, you shouldn't beat yourself up because you did the Disney thing that caused some people to quit, but at the same time, you've got to make choices that you think are best for your group, and ultimately we're all going to move through our various choirs trying to make the best decisions that we can for what that musical need and that social need, how is it going to be balanced? And we're not going to make those decisions perfectly. And I'm hoping that people listen to this conversation will at least get that out of it, which is that, I've tried these things with my choir. I tried to do more icebreakers, and I tried to do harder music. I've tried to do easier music, and it's just never going to serve everyone. And I think that's because it's not possible to serve everyone with everything.
You can't, and it's the old adage, you can't please 100% of people 100% of the time. It's just not possible. And you try very hard, and you get very offended, I think, as a choir director when you can't please someone. But you and it's just the way it is that you have to accept that. I think over the years I've had to realise I'm just not going to please everyone all the time. And if ultimately, sadly, some members decide to leave the choir as a result, there's very little I can do. I have to just let them go sometimes. It's a really tricky balance because, as you say, you want to keep everybody together all the time, and you want everyone to be happy and feeling the same way you do. It's just not possible. We have to be realistic, and we don't always make the best call. We do make mistakes. We're human too, but it's about doing what you feel is right. And I love the psychology of singing and the psychology of performing and understanding why people do what they do and how they react and why they react in certain ways to different styles of music. And that's for another day. That's another conversation.
Right.
But I do think it's funny because there's a lot of synergy between what we do, yet we're very different. And that's why it's been such a pleasure talking with you today. It's a learning experience no matter who we talk to in life, and I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to spend the time talking with me today.
Yes, of course. No, Russell, same to you. Thank you for spending this time together, and I hope people will go check out the Choir Director podcast. And of course, if your audience wants to come check out mine, I think you're right. What you said earlier is right. There will be different things for different folks available on both shows. And there's lots of different kinds of choir podcasts now, which has been a really neat thing for me to watch over the last 7 years. This world of choir conversation has really exploded. So Russell, thank you for hanging out with me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.